In this episode, we're getting dirty with this 1978 Porsche 911 SC. We'll be changing a CV boot. Stay tuned. Okay, so behind me is my 1978 Porsche 911 SC. It was also an early roof conversion in the early 80s to the roof SCR. I'll go more into that in another video, but today we're going to be changing the CV boot on one of my CV axles. I noticed that there was a rip in it during an inspection, so let's get started. Okay, so the first thing I want to go over is just how to spot a split in your CV boot early. If you're doing routine inspections on your car, as you can see here, as you rotate this, first the thing you're going to notice is that it's spraying oil or grease out of the boot itself. So that's the first sign, and you'll see there's signs of it here as well as inside the wheel well. As I spin it around, you can see there's the split right there. As I go around, it's starting to split on this side as well, but it hasn't. You can see it's cracking there, and then there's the actual split. So if I were to leave this, it's progressively going to get worse, and then eventually it is going to dry out my bearing and ruin it. If we change the boot early enough, hopefully we can save the bearings and just replace the boot. Okay, so what this job involves basically is we're going to have to remove these bolts that hold the axle to the hub here, and then there's also bolts right over here where it connects to the transmission. So let me just show you that. Okay, so this is the other side of the axle where it connects to the transmission. As you can see, this boot's in good shape, so I'm not going to be changing this one. I'm only going to be changing the one on the wheel side. The first step that we have to do is kind of clean everything up, because I don't want to contaminate anything inside there when we pull the axle off. So that's the first step, just cleaning this area all up, and let's get underway. Okay, so the first step after we've got everything cleaned up is we have to remove this axle nut. It does have a cotter pin, so we'll remove the cotter pin and then put the emergency brake and break this nut free. It's torqued fairly high, so this can be a bit of a challenge, but I've done it before and it's not too bad. Okay, so I've got the cotter pin out, got the emergency brake on. What you need is a 30mm nut, socket to fit on this nut, and I'm using a breaker bar. So let's see if we can break it loose. There it goes. So it does take quite a bit of force. I'd recommend a breaker bar for sure, or at least an extension on your socket. Okay, so once that nut's removed, there is also a washer in behind it, so just make sure you hang on to that and watch for it so it doesn't just drop and roll somewhere that you don't find it. At that point, this side of the axle is free, so we just need to move inside and disconnect everything from the transmission side. Okay, so when you see from the top side of the axle, you have pretty good access here to those nuts. What's really important to do here is to make sure you use a pick or something and clean out any debris that's kind of gathered in here, because if the socket doesn't, the Allen socket doesn't fit all the way in, you can end up stripping these bolts out because they're torqued, and depending on how long it's been since this axle has been offed, it can be a real pain. And if you strip these off, that turns into a whole bigger job. So basically go through, clean each one from the inside. It's also a good idea to kind of tap the socket in with a hammer before you try unbolting it. That just makes sure that it's seated completely all the way. So I'm going to go ahead and remove all these bolts, and then we should be able to just pull the axle out. Okay, so what I decided to do was I'm going to just at least break loose all these bolts on the inside as well, just because they are torqued fairly tight, and it's probably easier to do it on here than once we get it up onto the bench and in a vise. So I'm just going to do this as well. So just kind of rotating from side to side as I turn the axle, put the emergency brake back. Okay, so the last thing we have to do to be able to get the axle out is, on this particular model, the 911 SC anyways, is we do have to remove this shock bolt. So we can just move the shock out of the way so it allows us clearance to pull the axle out. So to do that, I'm using a 7/8 inch socket on the breaker bar, and let's give it a go. Okay, now that that's free, I should be able to just slide the axle out and drop it out. So let's see how this works. Alright, there it is. Okay, so now I've got the axle in the vise. The first thing is to remove the remaining bolts on the wheel side of the axle, and then I'll remove this spline and have access to the actual CV joint. Okay, so as I remove this last bolt, you'll see the axle just come off. Alright, so you can see there's a gasket here, and then here's the CV joint itself. Move this last bolt here. And you can see it's a bit of a mess. So what I'll do is I will clean this up a bit, and then I'll show you how we get this apart so that we can change the boot. Okay, so you can see this cleaned up now. You can see there's a circlip here that's basically holding the joint onto the axle. So what we need to do is use some basically circlip pliers, as well as I find if you use a small little screwdriver, that really helps just to kind of get it started, and then it'll pop off. Okay, so that's the circlip off. the circular pliers I have are kind of broken, and they're actually the wrong ones, right? I need ones that are going to be pulling this apart. These ones are for pushing it together. So I found the screwdriver, just get it under the lip a bit and just work it slowly around carefully, because you don't want to break the circlip. You're going to have to reuse that. So. Okay, so now, mine's already separated here, you can see, but now we should be able to just slide this off. Okay, and there's our joint. You can see there's lots of grease still in here, so because I caught that early, if you wait too long and it dries out, then that's when you're going to have bearing damage and you'll have to replace the whole thing. So the way this comes apart now is if you just rotate it, each one of these little balls will slowly just pop out, and we'll just pull them apart one by one here. Don't want to drop anything. Okay, so there's also a washer on the back side, which slides off of here like this. Mine came out with the joint, so it's concave this way. So you just want to make sure when you put it back on that you have the concave part out towards the wheel, because it creates a little bit of pressure on here, which holds it tight up against that circlip. So now this is basically the bearing cage here. And the way you get this apart is you just rotate this like this, and it should just come apart here. Like that. There we go. So the next step is just to clean all this up, and I'll pull this boot off. Actually, I can pull the boot off right now. There's just a metal band which I'll cut off the back here, and then this boot will slide right off, and that'll bring most of the grease with it, and then I can dispose of that and get the new boot ready to be put on. Okay, so there's the old boot. It's off. If you're replacing both, it's just the reverse. You do, or not the reverse, you just flip this over, and basically it's the same process on the other side. So. Okay, so I've got the replacement parts on the counter here. This is the kit. I ordered it from Pelican Parts. It's fairly reasonable. That's, like I said, if you catch it early enough, you can just change the boot and don't have to worry about replacing the bearings itself. So in the kit comes a new boot, gasket, grease, and a circlamp. I may not use that clamp. I might just use a zip tie, because I like it to be a little bit loose, and I keep a pretty good eye on it. So here we've got all my cleaned up parts. So basically we just need to put them back together. It's a good time now that they're clean to inspect them. If you're looking at this piece, you can see, you just want to watch for the wear. You can see the shiny parts on the insides here. That's where it is wearing, but that's okay. You just want to make sure that there's no actual pitting. And on this particular one, it looks pretty good. There's no major pitting, just a little bit of normal wear. So that looks good. The other thing that you want to look at is this piece here. You can see again the shiny parts, but there's no major pitting or anything, so we're going to be reusing this as well. An important thing to note though is that you can see it is tapered slightly on one end, so you want to make sure that when you're putting it back together that this piece here that you can see where the coned washer has been pushing up against, that's going to go onto the axle like this. So just make sure to take note of that when you're putting it back together. The other thing is when you look at, I'll put this together here just quickly here. That goes back together just like that. And then when you put it into here, you do want to take a look. You can see there's two close together and then two far apart. And here you've got kind of a thin and a thick. So basically you want to make sure that the thick piece goes with the thin piece here. So it's going to go together basically like that. So you can see thin, thick, thick, thin, thin, thick, and so on. Basically, if you put it together the wrong way, it's going to be hard to get it together for one thing, and secondly, it's not gonna move in and out. So I'll show you how it should work once I get it together here. So to start putting the bearings in, basically all you do is you just kind of rotate it a bit like this, snap it in. Oops, see, I got it rotated slightly there. Okay, so make sure that I've got thick and thin, and then the bearings just pop in just at a time here. Other thing I should note as well is before you start putting together, on mine, this ring on the outside, that faces out towards the wheel. So just make sure that so basically that's going out towards the wheel. The flat washer part here, the coned washer area, is going in towards the center of the car. So that's all back together. So now you can see, because I put it together correctly, it has the movement that basically is the reason for the CV joint, so that it can extend as the suspension works. Okay, we're ready to go back onto the axle. Okay, so here we are back to the axle. Before I put the boot on, I like to put just a little bit of grease just on the inside of the lip here. Just make it a little bit easier to slide onto the axle. And you may also find you need to help it a little bit with a screwdriver just to get it over these shoulders. So I'm going to slide it on here. Get it started. Work it around. First one. And down over the second one. Okay, so that's on. Okay, so I'm just gonna cut the corner off this bag of grease. It'll allow me to direct it where I want it. I'm going to add just a little bit inside the boot here, so it'll move around a bit once I get the axle in there. And then I can start basically greasing up this axle. So remember again, we want it so that the washer side's going in. So we will grease that side first. And basically what I'm doing here is I'm just going to squeeze it into these spots here. Work it in. Show the lots there. So I've got this greased and ready to go on. The next thing I want to do is just put the new gasket on there. So I'm just going to set this down. Get the gasket ready to go on. Okay, so this gasket actually has an adhesive on one side. So what I'm going to do is just make sure this is all nice and clean. Make sure I haven't gotten any grease on here. So I'm using a paper towel with just a little bit of alcohol on here. I'm just going to test fit it, make sure that it fits okay. Paper towel there. So you just want to make sure that those holes line up. Then I will remove the adhesive backing here. Just slide that on. Fits just like that. Okay, so that should stay put when I slide the bearing on. I just took my gloves off because they're a little greasy and I don't want to get grease all over here. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so now I'm ready to put the bearing on. Now is a pretty good time to start just putting the bolts back in. Once it's all together, it can be a little bit tricky, so I'm just going to clean these up a bit and do that. Okay, so I made a mistake. I forgot to put the washer on. So just make sure you put the washer on before you install this, and remember it cone side, so that it's basically curved, so it's coming this way. So that just slides on here. It's not a big deal if you forget, like I did, but this creates a bit more of a mess. All right. So. Okay, so that's back on. The next step is basically now to put the circlip on. So you just want to make sure this is clean. It's a good idea just to give it a bit of a wrap here, just to make sure it's seated all the way. That way it makes it easier to get the clip on itself. Okay, so snap that on, and just go around the edge of it, kind of giving it a tap on the circlip with the punch again. Just make sure that it's seated all the way. Good. Okay, so now we're ready to pack the grease in from this side. So, alright. So. move it around a bit, try and get it worked all the way back. It's a dirty job, so you're gonna make sure you got gloves and a lot of paper towels around. Okay, that should do it. Okay, so once we got all this all greased up, the last thing is to install this piece. With the 911 SC, you do need an extra gasket for this end, and it doesn't come in the kit. So when you order the kit, just order an extra gasket to attach to this to put on here. So I'm going to put this onto here, and then I'm going to add some grease to this, and then we'll insert that. So okay, so this is all ready to go on. We've got this well packed with grease. So we just need to line it up with the bolts, and I will start them. We'll hold this all together for us. Okay, so this is all put back together. I basically just done it hand tight, and I'll torque it up once I get them back on the car. But it's all put together and cleaned up, and it's ready to go in the car. The other side of the boot is good. I'm not going to take it all apart, but basically what I'll do is I will clean it up a bit and just re-grease it. So here's the other side all greased up and ready to go back in the car. So I'm going to head over to the car, put the axle in, and I'll update you from there. I'm not sure how much of that I'll video because it's basically the exact opposite of what we've just done, but maybe I'll go over torquing of the bolts and things like that. Okay, so the axle's back in loosely. I've got the bolts attached to the transmission. I still need to torque them up. I still need to torque the bolts on the back side here, but before I do that, I'm just going to reinstall the axle nut, torque it down, and put in a new cotter pin. Okay, so I've got that tight. Basically the torque specifications for this are like 250 pounds. My torque wrench doesn't go that high, so I'm just going to use a breaker bar to tighten it up. With the cotter pin on there, I think we should be good. Okay, so we're almost all done. These have all been torqued to the 34 foot-pounds. The inside ones at the transmission have been torqued to 34 foot-pounds. The last thing to do is just reinstall the shock. It gets torqued to 54 foot-pounds, and then it's just a matter of putting the wheel back on and laying it down on the floor. Okay, so everything's back together. We've got the wheels on, everything's torqued up, so that's the conclusion of another project. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. I've got more videos on the way, and thanks for tuning in to Analog Generation.